jump you an extra mana on the turn you unmorph it.
Yeah, and Jim also playing with Sagu Mauler, what we saw in Richard Wynn's deck list last round, so this is becoming a pretty popular adaptation. Matthew Costa playing Obzon mid-range. He was a big advocate coming into this tournament for Seeker of the Way. He said that he built 4 or 5 different Seeker of the Way decks, eventually settled on this one. So this is a pretty aggressive take. It's Seeker of the Way, Anafenza, the Foremost, Herald of Torment, Siege Rhino, and Wingmate Rock. So basically a black-white deck, touching green for Anafenza, Siege Rhino, and the Charm.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of Obzon decks like Brian Bronduin's, but Costa's really embracing the new cards in the set. We'll see here Jim on the play with Elvish Mystic, whereas Costa starts the game with a Tri-land.
So I'm interested to see to Jim and Richard, how similar are these lists to one another? And it looks like fairly different. There's Nylea in Jim's list. I don't think we saw that in Richard's list.
Yeah, one thing I like about Jim's list is he's one of the first people to be playing more than one morph as a 4 of in his, or at least a 3 of in his deck. So when he morphs a creature, Costa does not immediately know what it's going to be.
Right, we saw a little bit of that last round with Richard Wynn, although in a losing effort. Also with Battleclaw Mystic and Sagu Mauler. So pretty popular adaptation thus far to Green Devotion is touching red for some Planeswalkers, and then Sagu Mauler's not that hard to unmorph with Rattleclaw Mystic, Sylvan Caryatid, and so on.
Yeah. Remember, these players are at 3, 1, and 1 right now. Each has picked up a draw, but still should be live for top 8. Costa will sign in blood on turn 2. One thing about Matthew Costa's deck, when you compare it to some of the other Obzon lists we've seen, is it's a little lower to the ground. So he's playing 3 copies of Bioblade and 3 copies of Sign in Blood, trying to play as many of those 2-mana spells as possible. We were mentioning earlier that black is kind of short on 2 things to do it too.
For sure. Matt's list is, I mean, it's definitely an Obzon list, but this is basically a black-white beatdown list, touching a couple cards. So he can be a little more black-intensive with the spells.
Yeah, he turn 2 Sign in Blooded himself off of Landwar Wastes and had to discard. So that puts himself down to 16.
This game's going to be pretty challenging for Matthew to win unless he has a lot of removal stocked in his hand here. His deck's more of an aggressive deck. This is not the start that he's looking for, and something like Pelucranos unchecked from Jim this turn could easily win the game.
It's interesting. He's, unlike in Jay Dean's deck, which is also playing 4 Seeker of the Way, she's playing a Jeskai deck. Matthew's really just playing Seeker as a value card. It's not, he's not prowessing it too many times, maybe just once a turn. It's really just an endorsement that he believes this card is standalone good. He would have the chance to play something like Fleecemane Lion, but has chosen this instead.
Exactly. That's a huge endorsement for the card, as you mentioned. And it's one of those things where it can be a reasonably aggressive threat against control decks, but against other beatdown decks, having that in your deck is a huge edge over something like Fleecemane Lion. Hitting with a lifelinker, 3/3 lifelinker, twice, even once, is enough to be a huge swing in the race, especially when you're complementing it with things like Siege Rhino.
Yeah. On Jim's turn, he played a Temple turn 3 and made Pelucranos. Matthew just with a 3rd land and a pass representing Hero's Downfall, which he does have.
But in no rush to move just yet. Willing to see if Jim's, willing to do something better to use with this Hero's Downfall. Takes a slight risk because if Jim does have access to something like Nykthos, maybe more mana could have been made on the main phase, but Matt willing to take the gamble.
Yeah, there is the Hero's Downfall. Matthew's taking a lot of incidental damage here. He's had to pain for black mana for that one, and it's taken some Elvish Mystic hits, a Sign in Blood. He's down to 14 without taking a real attack yet.
And it's not like his deck is a control deck exactly, where he's going to be able to overpower Jim and come back. He still has a lot of 2-mana creatures and low impact removal spells and so forth.
You see here, Matt's going to search for a basic plains. It looks like he's going for Siege Rhino. Even then, he's going to have to pay another life point. It's 1 for the fetch and now 1 for a pain land if he wants to make Siege Rhino, which means it only actually gained him 1 life here.
But still not a bad deal. With that said.
Right. Still fine. A 4/5 trample's a great body here. There's a Nylea last turn for Jim. We'll see whether or not he has the mana to establish that devotion to Nylea. With Courser of Kruphix in his hand, it looks like he has that option.
Though this is still somewhat manageable for Matthew if he has some sort of removal spell to keep Jim off. He can afford to take this hit this turn. It's hard to swing back a little bit.
Courser shows a forest on top of Jim's deck. He's going to get that one for free into play. Nissa is the next in line. And Nylea's a 6/6 right now.
And I imagine we'll be attacking momentarily.
Yeah, this is pretty good for Jim. It's really overloading Matt's mana. You'll see that next turn he's going to have to deal with Courser to keep Jim off Devotion, and then also deal with Nissa and the 4/4 that Nissa's going to make. There's just a lot of things that Matt needs to remove, and I'm not sure if he'll have enough time to do it.
It's possible Bile-Blight could play a role here. I'm sure we would have seen it by now if it was in Costa's hand, but that could be a huge draw here.
Yeah, to take the Mystics out.
Yeah. Checking some of the Devotion and the mana that Jim's working with.
And Nylea as a 6/6 attacks here. It's going to put Costa down to 6. He stopped there to see if Jim was going to pump. Jim not willing to give up that top deck to Nissa. And that puts us back over to Costa. He does play one Utter End in his list, so he has an answer to Nylea in his deck. But outside of that, it's really double Bile-Blighting here.
And I believe Jim has the other Nylea in his hand right now. He has 2 in his list.
Costa's actually going to swing back with Siege Rhino. It's a pretty aggressive move here.
Well, blocking is just so bad for Costa because of the Nylea in play. So, and he's got to start getting something going here. So I don't mind the attack. And that also would explain
that
it.
explains it. He's triggering Raid for Wingmate Rock there. See, Wingmate Rock, 3/4 flyer that if you raid makes another 3/4 flyer. The new Broodmate Dragon, if you will.
Yeah, Shades of Broodmate, except 1 color is a lot less than 3, and 5 mana is a lot less than 6.
We'll see if it's enough. There's still a lot of things left to answer. Jim draws Nissa Worldwaker for the turn. We see another Wooded Foothills on top of his deck.
That's another very good excuse for Costa to race here. Also, he's generating 6 points of power in the air. Not inconceivable for him to come back from this, as bad as this game started for him.
Yeah, originally I would have thought he was going to try to kill everything, but it just doesn't look that way. It looks like he's going to take the race to the skies here and just try to kill Jim first. Yeah, looks like Nissa Worldwaker, Yavimaya Coast also in Jim's hand.
Just something to help facilitate the Sagu Mauler.
Yeah, he is a teamer deck. It is almost all green, but he does have Sagu Mauler and Xenagos the Reveler as a splash in each color.
So this is sort of an awkward spot. If Jim commits the Nissa before combat and makes an attack, he's basically just sending in the token and the Nissa, which gives Matt a pretty juicy double block. If he just attacks now, Matt can try to block in such a way that forces Jim to commit mana to the pumping and keeps Nissa off the table for 1 more turn. So right now, Jim's trying to figure out how bad do the blocks look for me if I just start off by attacking.
All right, we're going to start there. Courser and Nylea both swinging. Because Jim has 8 mana available, Matt's going to have to block this Nylea.
Yeah.
So he's forcing 1 chump block. We'll see whether or not Matt decides to let the Courser through or whether he wants to put the other bird in front of that one. I imagine he'll let Courser through. It's going to keep the original Wingmate Rock because of that triggered ability on it.
Yeah, it seems like you just want to be making this block here because Jim has the option of just allowing the Courser and the Rock to bounce off of each other. So there's no guarantee you even get Jim to commit the mana. You're basically allowing him to decide whether or not he wants to kill your Rock or add this is the board. So not a lot to be gained by blocking.
It looks like those are the blocks. So now Jim is going to decide whether or not he has pumps. And with Nissa in hand, I'm guessing he'll just put 2 damage onto Costa. Oh, we'll see. He's going to fetch once. There was a Courser of Kruvix on top of his deck. We'll see what the first new card is here. Jim Down to 15 off that fetch.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to see how Jim wants to navigate this because he's got a lot of options. It's one of those spots where it looks favorable for you, but
Right.
the game still feels losable, so you have to be very careful.
Nykthos Shrine to Nyx. That's not what he's going to want either. He's going to fetch again. Remember, he's not actually paying life for these. Well, he's paying a life, but then he gains it back as soon as one hits the table from Corsair of Crewfix.
It's free-ish.
Yeah. And we'll see if he may just be sinking mana into the Corsair here.
Yeah, I don't mind. I don't mind this play at all because once we're in this spot where you're not playing the Nissa this turn, you're already kind of behind. You know what I mean? You're not adding any pressure to the board this turn. So you still have the opportunity to take your spot right now to deal a bunch of damage with this Corsair, and then still have the Nissa available next turn to add to your board. This feels like a more efficient allocation of resources to me, given what Matt's life total is like.
Yeah, puts all 6 damage into Corsair, so that'll knock Costa down to 3. Jim tapped out for the turn. And the draw from Matthew was Utter End. Not a bad draw here. He does have another Siege Rhino, a Seeker of the Way, a 6th land.
Well, Utter End is really intriguing here because even with the Nissa, it means that Matt does not die this coming turn. So
yeah, you can use it in combat. Jim does have a backup Nissa, but he can't actually play around Utter End with that one.
yeah, this is, you know, Costa's got a shot here, it feels like. There's at least room for Jim to mess up.
Right, well, there's a worry, right? If Costa, so you'd think he'd play Seeker of the Way and Utter End, but then he has to decide when he wants to Utter End. If he lets Jim untap, Jim, in response to the Utter End, can pump his Elvish Mystics or something like that, which actually, with Costa at 3, is, you know, turning a 1/1 into a 3/3 is a pretty big threat.
The flip side of it is, you know, if he waits to Utter End on his turn, if Costa can get to a spot where he, you know, gets a chump block and maybe Jim messes up, then you get a lifelink blocker, and that could be a fairly big swing here as well. So there's a lot of ways for Costa to potentially navigate this.
See, he has Siege Rhino, Thoughtseize, Utter End, Seeker of the Way, and a land.
Adding to some of the complexity here is his mana base. 3 of the lands require points of damage, and his hand's very colored mana intensive as well. So there's also the factor of, can I cast everything that I need to cast, take this damage off of these pain lands or this Windswept Heath or what have you, and still be able to survive, say, the Elvish Mystic shots.
Exactly. And that land for turn is a fetch land, so it's another point of life here. Matt's going to swing both creatures. That's a swing for 7, which will put Jim Davis to 8. Costa gains 2 life off the Wingmate Rock trigger. Wingmate Rock, when it attacks, it gains 1 life for each attacking creature. And now it is Seeker of the Way on Matt's side. He has an Utter End up. We'll have to pay 1 life for that from the fetch land.
And it wouldn't surprise me if Costa's plan here is just chump the Nylea, use Utter End in combat, and hope that that's good enough here.
I was actually going to note, it's kind of fortunate what Matt's mana is right now. He only plays 2 basic plains and 1 basic forest. So this Windswept Heath, if Matt had just drawn his other plains, it wouldn't be able to help him cast the Utter End.
Well, he would still have his tri-land and the plains in theory.
Yeah, I mean, if the second plains was, say, in his hand.
Oh, sure.
He only has 3 fetchable lands from this Windswept Heath.
Oh, right. How many Windswept Heaths are in the list?
2.
Okay.
I was hoping the answer was going to be 4. I love that. I mean, you know, you can play extras. He does play 2 Urborg, so, you know, worst case scenario, they're swamps. You can still tap them.
No, that's not the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is you run out of lands to fetch and then your lands don't work. That's actually the worst case scenario.
Well, yeah. But then you find an Urborg and then they tap again and you're fine. So back on Jim's turn. You see, on top of the deck is Sagu Mauler, probably not going to matter here. It's looking like this is the last one of this. This or the next turn is the last one.
This is tough too because Jim needs to be able to threaten lethal this turn and not die on the way back if something goes wrong. And that's asking a lot.
Well, not dying on the way back isn't that hard. Costa doesn't actually have lethal here if he has to chump with the Seeker of the Way. He only has 7 damage. Jim is at 8.
Sure.
So Jim has some breadth here to work with. Jim hit with another Nylea, a Nissa Worldwaker, a Wooded Foothills, among other cards in his hand.
Another thing to consider, if Jim goes to combat and makes an attack and Costa blocks something, and then Jim pumps whatever,
Costa can in response.
He can utter end the Nylea, and now whatever he's blocking loses trample.
Yeah, and that's huge.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on this turn,
Will Jim play around the utter end is the question. I feel like if Jim knew Costa had utter end in his hand, Jim can successfully navigate this.
Mm-hmm.
He can play around utter end, but he has to know to do it.
Correct.
He's going to start by fetching with Wooded Foothills. That keeps him at 8 life.
And then let's say you leave your Elvish Mystics back on defense to provide you as much mana to fight through things. Well, now all of a sudden he has access to the play of chump block your Nylea, utter end the thing that you're attacking with. It's a tough spot. There's a lot going on that Jim has to play around.
Let's say Jim doesn't play around utter end, but he plays around Hero's Downfall instead. In a lot of ways, it's the same thing. Not all of them.
Yeah, except that the Nylea, your hand is forced by the Nylea to some extent.
See what he goes with. So he has the potential for 2 pumps from Nylea. I'm wondering if he swings Elvish Mystic and a Courser and a Nylea, is there any way he can force Costa to utter end something that isn't Nylea? He's going to go a different way. He's going to cast Nissa Worldwaker. And I like this. It guarantees that Nylea will still have her proper devotion.
Another factor in all of this is, given the number of cards that Jim is playing around here, mostly removal, there's a huge risk in just committing everything into Nylea and pumping into your creatures. You can add Nissa to the table. What Matthew Costa is not capable of handling right now is just large creatures. He may be able to handle everything going into one creature because of a removal spell, but just generating as many 4/4s and 5/5s as possible, and then untapping the following turn, and then having Nylea plus your pumps available, maybe the best thing to do. Right now, Jim is still producing a lethal attack. So it forces something out of Costa, at the minimum a chump block.
He's going to swing the Nylea, the 4/4, and you can see whether or not he's going to throw one more thing in. He might throw in a Courser or an Elvish Mystic to make it a lethal attack, barring, just to force Costa's blocks to be a lot worse.
Sure.
That would be, because then Mystic plus the 4/4 is 5 points. It forces Costa to deal with more than one thing.
Although committing the Elf does give Costa kind of a free block to some extent. I guess the block on the Courser is also free because Jim will be short on the mana to pump.
Well, I like the attack. If he swings Courser and Mystic, I think he just has it, right? Well, he forces Costa to chump block. You'd have to utter end, say, the Nylea. You have to utter end the Nylea. There's no way to, I actually don't know if, is there, he'd have to utter end the 4/4, chump the Nylea is his only surviving line.
Assuming that he attacks with what?
A Mystic, a Courser. If he attacks with everything but an Elvish Mystic.
Sure.
I think if he swings the entire team, I think Costa's dead to that. Now, granted, that doesn't mean it's the right play. Because
I don't know if that's true because the lifelink trigger off of the Seeker,
you're absolutely right.
Puts him where he survives that attack.
You're right.
And doesn't even die because he can put it on top. He can, go ahead and
completely forgot about that.
Put it in front of the 2/4 utter end something. You gain 3.
Yeah, with a lifelink, maybe I think Costa survives any of these attacks.
Yeah.
So Jim goes for a conservative play then. Just going to swing the safe, the indestructible attacker. That's Nylea. Costa's going to have to answer anyways.
Yeah, I really like this a lot because Jim still has a pretty overwhelming board. He can go into next turn and do the same thing again.
Right.
And, he minimizes the risk of, Costa has something like Utter End or a removal spell of some sort. He doesn't win inside of combat, and Jim actually dies on the way back. So it's a very tough turn from Jim, and I respect the fact that, he's ultimately come to the conclusion of, let's not get too hasty here. Next turn, I put him in the same squeeze, and let's bleed out this removal spell and not risk any bad attacks.
So he's going to fetch here. Looks like he's going to force into playing the Utter End, which he'll do. It's going to hit Nylea. By only swinging with Nylea, it actually takes away Costa's ability to get lifelink on that off that trigger too.
Yeah.
Or to gain life. And Jim will pass the turn. Now he had the option there. He could have tapped to recast his other Nylea with the 4/4. Would have meant he only had 2 blockers, however.
Yeah, somewhat risky to run that play. Because at that point, even just with the Rock and the Siege Rhino, that's 7 points in play. You've already seen Sign and Blood out of Costa's deck, so are you willing to chump block the Siege Rhino next turn? It's not a great spot to be chump blocking.
Well, you'd have a Nylea, an active Nylea, right? So she could block it.
Sure.
But it is more dangerous, to be sure.
I've been really impressed by Wingmate Rock.
Well, I mean, Wingmate Rock has been very good. It's a 6 power flyer for 5.
Well, it's tough. You need to be playing in a deck that also can fulfill the raid trigger, which generally doesn't overlap that reliably with 5-mana creatures, but Costa has definitely constructed his deck to make it a reality.
It seems very good at the top end of these mid-range decks.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Costa still has a Thoughtseize and Siege Rhino in his hand. He drew a card for the turn. Don't know what that is yet.
It's not even like Costa's deck is particularly creature heavy. All the creatures are just really good at attacking. Herald of Torment, Siege Rhino, Alfonso, Seeker of the Way. They're all good attackers.
It is a mid-range deck through and through. It has 17 creatures and about the same number of spells. Siege Rhino and Wingmate Rock are the attacks. Matt has a Siege Rhino in his hand. So Jim is at 6, though he doesn't know it yet. He has to put enough things in front of Siege Rhino. But if he puts too much in front of it, then he won't have a lethal attack on the way back.
And this is another tough squeeze, because let's imagine that you put one blocker in front of the Siege Rhino to absorb as much as possible. If Jim has a removal spell for your creature, then all the trample damage gets committed, and then you might lose to a Sign and Blood post-combat, or maybe another Siege Rhino, depending, so.
Right, and if Costa has the kill spell and the burn spell, I'm not sure Jim would be able to beat it anyway, so he may just play like it's not there.
Well, he needs to kind of split the difference between making sure he doesn't die if he blocks with one thing and making sure he doesn't lose too many things if he blocks with multiple things.
Exactly.
So it's possible he wants to make sort of a hybrid chump block here, or a hybrid block/chump block, where he's putting enough in front to kill the Siege Rhino, but also making sure that he doesn't lose the game in the event that Costa has one removal spell.
And Jim, forgetting that his Nylea is gone, so he made the block and then tapped 4 to pump his 4/4.
Yeah, well, no big deal. I mean, the block still
Block's
works out
still
fine.
good.
Yeah,
I'm wondering if he realized that if he wanted to recast his other Nylea.
sure.
Matt ends up trading Siege Rhino for a 4/4 land. Jim goes down to 6 off Matt's second Siege Rhino. Matt actually goes up to, Jim's down to 5. Matt's at 8, so.
Yeah, no, Jim fell all the way there to, he was at 9 at the start of the turn there, so,
okay, so
took 3 and
from
3
the rock,
again. I mean, he's looking at lethal from this rock next turn. There's no way to block a flyer as the board's currently constructed.
All right, yeah, we have 8 and 3, so he's gonna have to put 8 damage across, and that looks pretty difficult on this board.
Yeah, he can commit the Nylea. If he activates Nylea, if he casts Nylea and activates the Nissa, that's basically 5 lands committed. He can't even use the Nylea at that point. He does have a land in hand, so I guess he could do that, but...
Now go back in time with me to last turn. If Jim casts Nylea last turn and just has that as a blocker, then he gets to have, there'll be 2 Siege Rhinos on Matt's side. Because he would have left back the other Siege Rhino, most likely.
Yeah. No, it's...
And then Jim would have a 4/4 in play, right? So he'd have a 6/6 and a 4/4. I'm not even sure if that's enough. It's closer.
I'm not sure if Jim just thought the Nylea never went anywhere, or he already had his turn scripted out thinking that he wasn't going to do anything after the fact. Or he wanted to save the Nylea in his hand as a surprise for the following turn, assuming that Costa would have blockers and attackers lined up to not beat another Nylea. But now we're here, and I'm not sure Jim can win, though. That land off the courser, that life off the courser there is a huge deal.
No, completely agree. Jim has the option of making Nylea also with Genesis Hydra. He's going to go for a huge Genesis Hydra. He uses the plus ability on Nylea to untap 4 lands. So Genesis Hydra is going to be for 11.
So the big hits here, the biggest hit in the deck here, there's 2 copies of Hornet Queen.
Sounds like he's going for Hornet Queen for sure. Does he have Arbor Colossus to hit? Because that'd be pretty sweet too.
0 copies.
All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And he hits Pelucranos, not Hornet Queen. It might be enough though. He does have, he doesn't have any mana floating. It's Sagu Mauler. That's not going to do much with Trample and Hexproof. He needs something. Well, he doesn't have to block the flyer this turn. He gets it because he went up to 4. So he gets Sagu Mauler and the Genesis Hydra. And next turn he can play the Nylea to give Genesis Hydra Trample.
Right. So, but Costa now is definitely drawing life here. I mean, Sign in Blood, another Siege Rhino. They all get it done.
Yeah, he does have 2. Yeah, he could draw any of the 2 remaining Sign in Bloods.
It looks like Costa missed regardless there with the Nurborg.
And now the question is, can Costa survive another turn? It's going to be... I don't think so.
Just
now that we know about the Nylea. So Costa actually had 6 outs there. Abzan Charm, the Sign in Blood mode on it is targeted, so he could have targeted Jim with that one as well.
Sure. Apologies, that is actually not how Abzan Charm works. It is just you, so the draw was just Sign in Blood, basically.
Okay, it's just the 2 remaining.
And the Siege Rhinos.
Yeah, so Matt, looks like he's going to be 1 damage short here. He's right now planning to see if he could survive just this next attack. I think if he knew about the Nylea, then he'd know he was done. He has a pair, at least 1 Thoughtseize here. I think it's 2.
Yeah, it's 2 and the Urborg he just drew. You wouldn't think of a matchup against, Green Devotion as something where the taxing on your life total would matter, but Jim started off the game with so many mana accelerants and just got in these chip shots, and now the Thoughtseizes, the Pain Lands, they're all adding up.
They did keep Matt low. Now, to his credit, when Jim wins this game, he's going to win with a bunch of overkill. He has an 11/11 Trampler in play.
Well, there was the turn 2 turns ago where the specifics of Costa's life total did matter quite a bit.
Yeah.
So usually the Devotion decks, when they win by a landslide at the end of things, but the extra points are a factor.
So he's just going to leave everything back. and passes the turn to Jim.
There is a Nykthos, which I believe alongside the Nylea in hand should give Jim enough to push through these blockers.
Haven't done the math on it, but I can't imagine it won't do it. Yeah, the Nykthos is going to tap for 2, 4, 6, 9. If he plays the Nylea first, it taps for 10. Completely agree. So we'll see where Jim goes with this. He's going to tap the 4 forests to cast Nylea. And now that gives Nissa the ability to untap them if she needs to. Matt doesn't need to see any more, and he's going to scoop to the Nylea.
Yeah, time is a fact. I mean, we're under 20 minutes in the round already, so Matt's not going to bother making Jim go through the combat at that spot.
All right, so we'll look first at Matt Costa's sideboard, what he can do against these green devotion strategies. They certainly have been the most popular things of the day. He has the 4 copies of Drown in Sorrow, which are okay here, especially because Jim is playing Rattleclaw Mystics. They are a little more live than they'd normally be. On top of that, he has he has 2 copies of Elspeth Sun's Champion, possibly a way to close out.
Seems like a pretty slow for this matchup. I think that Costa probably wants that card for matches where he's the control and not the beatdown player. I do like the 3 Despises in his sideboard quite a bit. There are nothing but basically, creatures and planeswalkers in the devotion list. So Despise seems very well suited for the challenge.
Completely agree here. Thoughtseize is one of the best things to do against these green devotion decks. And if you can have 7 of them in your deck of Thoughtseize plus Despise, I'd probably play all 7.
That makes sense. On Jim's side, 2 Reclamation Sages, 2 Hunt the Hunter, 3 Magma Spray, 4 Negate, 4 Nylea's Disciple.
Hunt the Hunter actually seems pretty interesting in this matchup. It is a green creature mirror. He did see Siege Rhinos and Anafenza, so there's 7 of them. But getting rid of Matt's creatures seems important.
Well, he doesn't even actually, based on what he saw, Costa's deck never showed the Anafenza, I think, so it's just the Siege Rhino, which is not the easiest thing to fight.
Probably can't board it in against that. So what do you like out of the sideboard, if anything?
I like the Negate's fine, but I wouldn't really go past that.
He does have access to a full play set of Negate.
And I don't even know if I would want 4 Negates. I may just want a couple. But I think Jim's going to sideboard pretty light for this matchup.
Yeah, both players actually, I'd say, with light sideboards here. So we'll get underway for the second game. Anafenza the Foremost. This is one of the Cycle of Legends from the set. I'd say it once again it kind of fits into your Siege Rhino mentality here that Abzan has, right? Where it's really efficient.
Correct. Yeah, it's just the numbers are great. Abzan rates.
Yeah, it's got a great rate to it.
Yeah. I really like your rate. Your deck's got a bunch of great
good rates in it.
Wingmate Rock, that's a raider.
Yeah, what I think is interesting about it in this deck is its first ability where it puts counters on tapped creatures. Doesn't seem like it's going to trigger too much in this deck. Matt only has 17 creatures, and a lot of them are more expensive than Anafenza anyway. So he really, to me, seems like he's playing it for the 4/4 for 3 with some incidental value.
Which is kind of the type of thing his deck is in the market for anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
And with Seeker of the Way, it can be really sweet.
To put an extra counter on Seeker.
Yeah. Take a look at these records here also. A draw is helping neither of these players.
Yeah.
And time is of an issue.
And you can notice that as the players speed up here in their decisions. I think both of them realize that they invested a lot of time into game 1 and do want to make sure they get the whole match and finished.
Jim Davis is not the world's fastest player, so this comes up.
And we're underway. Costa with the Temple of Malady, going to scry to the bottom and passes back. He has his copy of Utter End in his opener. Looks like he is a healthy grip of lands. We'll see what threat it comes with. Jim starts on Elvish Mystic.
That was right off the top. This was the opening that doomed Costa last game. Just was under the gun too quickly.
Yeah, Costa looks like he has a lot of removal. He has Hero's Downfall, Abzan Charm, and Utter End, all in the opener. Not sure he has a threat. Maybe a Herald of Torment, but that's about it. And this is one thing that we've seen in the Green Mirrors. Both players on turns 1 and 2 really seem to be setup turns for the most part. Jim scried and played Rattleclaw Mystic.
Costa's really the only one that can come out of the gates with something like Seeker of the Way. And it wouldn't surprise me if he just sideboarded those out altogether in this matchup.
And on Costa's side, third land here. We'll see if he does have that Herald of Torment. It is at the front of his hand. He's debating between that and a kill spell here. I would imagine against this kind of deck, you just play your creatures out and then you kill the big things.
That's usually what you want to be doing unless you're confident that you can stop them on mana, and Costa has no reason to believe that Jim's stuck on land, so.
Cast Herald. Matt with a second Herald in his hand as well. And then we'll go over to Davis' side. He's going to get to take this turn with 5 mana available. He does have a Nissa Worldwaker, also a Courser of Crufix, a couple ways to go with this turn. And it's just going to be Nissa Worldwaker, making a 4/4. And right now, it's at 4 loyalty. The Herald of Torment can't take it down right away.
So pretty nice turn there for Jim. Gets to put some pressure on Costa, which is a nice thing to do in the face of the Herald of Torment, who's going to be damaging Matt along the way here. No risk really of losing his Planeswalker.
Yep. Costa does not appear to have a 4th land either. So he's going to go ahead and swing the Herald at Nissa, and he's going to put 2 1/1 counters on it with the Abzan Charm so that he can take it out.
Which is fine, although Jim can definitely race from this spot. It's got a lot of pressure in play.
Yeah, I think what it does is that Costa's in a pretty tight spot. It does mean he has a 5/5 blocker for that 4/4. He's going to take a lot of damage this turn and then hope that on the following turns he can sit behind Herald of Torment and basically just draw out of this.
Well, Herald of Torment's not the best creature to be sitting back on defense.
Right, it's got a limited lifespan.
Yeah, in this kind of spot, so.
Jim's going to swing for 4 or for 5 and then follow up with a Pelucranos. Costa down to 13, 12 from Herald, or down to 10 even.
Pretty rare to see just the Green Devotion beatdown draw be good enough. I mean, there's no Nykthos thing really going on here. It's just curve of stuff.
One thing about Costa's deck is it really taxes his own life total. You see here, Herald of Torment ones him on his upkeep. Every time he's casting a spell here, whether it was Abzan Charm or Herald of Torment or the Hero's Downfall I think he's going to cast, he's had to pain each time for one of those.
Yeah, he has 8 Pain Lands, 4 Caves, and 4 Landlord Ways, plus a mana Confluence.
Yeah, and that's on top of cards like Herald of Torment that also hurt you, and Thoughtseize.
Yeah.
And Sign in Blood. And yeah, he uses his own life points a lot here. And Jim, it looks like, is going to make Hornet Queen. And then see if he offers a trade here with Pelucranos. Hornet Queen's a card that's very difficult, though, for any mid-range deck really to deal with, unless they're playing a sweeper like a Doomwake Giant or something.
It's a ton of value.
Pelucranos gets hit by Hero's Downfall. Costa will take a damage from his mana for that, and then take another damage on his upkeep. He's down to 8.
And, you know, this is one of those things where you're in Jim's spot, you can just be as conservative as possible, because you're looking over at Costa's board and not a lot going on. You're looking at his mana. It's a pain land. He probably needs to tap to keep his head above water, so just don't risk anything, because Costa's doing a lot of the work for Jim.
He did draw Bile Blight for the turn, so Costa will be able to take care of the Hornet army. But thanks to Hornet Queen, Jim Davis has a lot of mana off this Nykthos. Yeah, he's going to go ahead and just cast the Xenagos for 4, though, tapping Nykthos for colorless.
And I think Jim's saying, all right, I'm tagging with everything. Show me what you got.
Makes a Satyr and swings the team. Costa's going to put the 5/5 in front of the 4/4. And that's still not going to be enough. He could survive that turn.
No, because even if he Bioblights the tokens,
sure,
he goes to, there's 6 coming across uncontested.